The telegram trembled in Rosalie Fairchild's hand as her father's ultimatum struck her like a slap. Return home and marry banker's son, or remain disinherited. The paper crumpled in her fist as she gazed at the endless prairie stretching before her. The Kansas wind whipped her auburn hair free from its pins, but she wouldn't turn back, not now, not when she was finally free. It was 1876, and at 22, Rosalie had already fled one arranged marriage in Boston. She'd used her savings to answer an advertisement in the matrimonial news, seeking a wife for a rancher in the Wyoming Territory. Her prospective husband had been corresponding with a docile, obedient young woman, her cousin, who had fallen ill and begged Rosalie to take her place rather than disappoint the waiting groom. Rosalie had seized the opportunity, never mentioning the substitution in her subsequent letters. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Whispering Pines, the small settlement where she was to meet her future husband. Rosalie straightened her travel-worn dress and adjusted her hat. The driver handed down her trunk with a grunt. "Careful with that," she instructed firmly. "There are breakables inside." The driver muttered something about women giving orders, but placed the trunk down more gently. The town consisted of a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, saloon, small church, and sheriff's office made up the heart of Whispering Pines. Rosalie took a deep breath and marched toward the general store, where she was to meet her intended. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. Several faces turned toward her weathered men in worn hats, a woman arranging dry goods, and behind the counter, a thin, balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. "You must be Miss Fairchild," the shopkeeper said, smiling. "We've been expecting you. Mr. Peterson said to send you straight to his ranch when you arrived. He's preparing for your wedding." Rosalie nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Is there transportation available?" Before the shopkeeper could answer, the door opened and a tall man entered. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe, his face shadowed by a worn leather hat. When he stepped into the light, Rosalie noticed his striking blue eyes contrasting with sun-bronzed skin. "Holden," the shopkeeper called. "Good timing. This here's Miss Fairchild. Just arrived for Peterson." The tall man Holden looked at Rosalie with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. His eyes traveled from her face down to her mud-spattered boots and back up again, his expression unreadable. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. "Mr. Peterson sent you to collect me?" Rosalie asked, chin raised. A smile tugged at the corner of Holden's mouth. "No, madam, I'm Holden Tucker. I run the Triple T Ranch north of town. Just came for supplies." He turned to the shopkeeper. "Peterson knows she's here?" "Just about to send word," the shopkeeper replied. "I'll take her," Holden offered unexpectedly. "Passing that way anyhow?" Rosalie frowned. "I can speak for myself, Mr. Tucker, and I haven't agreed to your escort." The shopkeeper and other patrons fell silent, eyes widening at her bold retort. Holden's eyebrows rose slightly, but instead of anger, something like amusement flickered across his face. "My apologies, Miss Fairchild. Would you permit me to escort you to Peterson's ranch? It's 5 miles out, and I have a wagon." Rosalie considered her options. Wait for Peterson's transport or accept this stranger's offer. "Very well, Mr. Tucker. I accept your kind offer." 20 minutes later, they were heading out of town, Rosalie perched stiffly on the wagon seat beside Holden. Her trunk was secured in the back among his supplies. "So," Holden said after a mile of silence, "you're Peterson's mail-order bride." "I am to marry Mr. Peterson, yes," Rosalie replied carefully. "Interesting." Holden kept his eyes on the trail. Peterson described his bride to be as gentle as a spring lamb. Rosalie's stomach tightened. Perhaps he was being poetic. Holden chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "No offense, Miss Fairchild, but you strike me as more mountain lion than spring lamb." Rosalie turned to stare at him, uncertain whether to be insulted or flattered. "I assure you, Mr. Tucker, I can be perfectly agreeable when the situation warrants." "I'm sure you can." He glanced at her, that half-smile returning. "But it's the fire behind those green eyes that tells the truth." "My temperament is none of your concern," she said sharply. "True enough?" He fell silent for a moment, then added, "Peterson's a particular sort of man, likes things just so, doesn't care for surprises or Spirit. Are you attempting to warn me, Mr. Tucker? Just making conversation, Miss Fairchild. They rode in silence for another mile. The landscape was beautiful in its wildness, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, prairie grasses swaying in the wind. It's magnificent, Rosalie murmured, almost to herself. That it is. Holden's voice softened. Never gets old, watching the seasons change across this land. How long have you been here? 8 years. Came west after the war, started with nothing but determination and a pair of good horses. He didn't elaborate on which war, but Rosalie suspected the Civil War from his age, which she guessed to be about 30. And now you have your own ranch. The Triple T. Not the biggest spread, but it's mine. Built every fence post and corral myself. Pride resonated in his voice, and Rosalie found herself admiring his accomplishment. That's commendable, Mr. Tucker. They crested a hill, and Holden pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, Peterson's place. Below them spread a neat farm with whitewashed buildings arranged in perfect symmetry. Fields were planted in careful rows, fences ran straight as arrows, and even the trees seemed to stand at attention. It's very orderly, Rosalie observed, a knot forming in her stomach. Like I said, Peterson likes things just so. As they approached the farmhouse, a thin man with a precisely trimmed beard emerged. Edgar Peterson was exactly as his letters had described, 45 years old, methodical and proper. His clothes, despite being work clothes, were immaculate. Miss Fairchild, he said, helping her down from the wagon. His eyes took in her traveled, disheveled appearance with barely concealed disapproval. I see you've arrived safely, though not as I expected. I was preparing to send my foreman for you. Mr. Tucker kindly offered transportation, Rosalie explained. Peterson nodded stiffly toward Holden. Tucker. Appreciate you bringing my bride. No trouble, Peterson. Holden began unloading Rosalie's trunk. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. Peterson turned back to Rosalie. You must be tired from your journey. Mrs. Winters, my housekeeper, will show you to your room. We'll be married by Pastor Goodwin on Sunday, giving you 3 days to rest and prepare. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Rosalie said, forcing a smile. That's very considerate. Holden set her trunk on the porch, then tipped his hat. Miss Fairchild, best wishes for your happiness. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. Peterson, good day to you. As he climbed back into his wagon, Rosalie felt a strange reluctance to see him go. He was the only person she'd met in this new place who seemed to see her clearly and didn't seem to mind what he saw. Peterson showed her inside to a pristine parlor where everything was arranged with mathematical precision. Mrs. Winters has prepared tea. After you've refreshed yourself, we can discuss household matters and my expectations. Rosalie nodded, suddenly feeling trapped. What had she gotten herself into? The next morning, Rosalie woke at dawn. She'd spent a restless night in the immaculate guest room, thinking about her impending marriage. Peterson had spent the previous evening outlining his expectations for a wife meek, obedient, quiet, and above all, orderly. Everything Rosalie was not. She dressed quickly and slipped outside. Peterson had mentioned he rose at precisely 6:30 each morning. It was barely 5, giving her time to explore and think. The air was crisp, the sky painted in brilliant pinks and oranges. Rosalie walked toward a small creek at the edge of the property, breathing deeply. This land was beautiful, but could she be happy here, with a man who seemed more concerned with symmetry than passion? As she rounded a bend in the creek, she nearly collided with a man kneeling by the water. "Mr. Tucker!" she exclaimed, startled. Holden looked up, equally surprised. "Miss Fairchild, you're up early. I could say the same for you, and on Peterson's property, no less." He stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Creek runs through both our lands. I'm tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves." "Alone? Is that wise?" He smiled at her concern. "Been doing it most of my life, madam." "Please don't call me madam. It makes me feel ancient." "What should I call you then?" "Rosalie is my name." "Rosalie," he said, as if testing the sound of it. "Suits you better than madam, I'll grant you that." She studied him in the morning light. Without his hat shadowing his face, she could see his features' clearly strong jawline, those remarkable blue eyes, and laugh lines that suggested he smiled often. "Are you always out at this hour, Mr. Tucker?" "Holden," he corrected. "And yes, most days. Best time to get the measure of things." The measure of things? The land tells stories if you listen. Tracks show who passed in the night. The way birds sing tells you if there's danger nearby. He gestured around them. Most folks miss it all, especially those who never look beyond their fences. The comment seemed pointed, and Rosalie wondered if he was referring to Peterson. "I saw you examining Peterson's fields yesterday," Holden continued. "You didn't look particularly impressed." Rosalie hesitated. "They're very neat. But nature isn't meant to be forced into straight lines, is it? There's beauty in wildness." Holden's smile widened. "I knew it. Definitely not a spring lamb." Despite herself, Rosalie laughed. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Tucker?" "Holden," he reminded her. "And yes, it is." They walked along the creek together, Holden occasionally pointing out tracks or plants. He was knowledgeable without being condescending, and Rosalie found herself relaxing in his company. "Why did you come west?" he asked eventually. Rosalie considered how much to reveal. "I wanted freedom. In Boston, my life was prescribed. And now you're marrying Peterson." She stiffened. "That's different. This is my choice." "Is it?" His gaze was penetrating. "Or just a different kind of cage?" "You're being presumptuous, Mr. Tucker." "Probably," he agreed easily. "But I've seen Peterson break spirited horses until there's nothing left but obedience." Seems a shame to see the same happen to a woman. Rosalie stopped walking. "I should return. Mr. Peterson will be rising soon." Holden nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Wouldn't want to upset his schedule." She turned to go, then paused. "Will I see you again before the wedding?" "Planning to attend, if that's all right. Small town, everyone goes to everything." "Good," she said, before she could stop herself. "That's good." He touched his hat brim. "Until Sunday, then." "Rosalie." The way he said her name made her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to turn away. She was engaged to another man. These feelings were inappropriate and inconvenient. Yet, as she hurried back to Peterson's orderly farmhouse, she couldn't help but feel that Holden Tucker understood her better after one conversation than Edgar Peterson had in months of correspondence. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. Peterson had scheduled every moment, fittings with the town seamstress for a wedding dress, introductions to neighbors, instructions on his preferred household management. Each evening he reviewed Rosalie's progress with the same attention he gave to his farm ledgers. By Saturday night, Rosalie felt suffocated. After dinner, while Peterson worked in his study, she escaped to the front porch. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rain. The air felt heavy, charged with electricity that matched her restless mood. "Miss Fairchild." She turned to find Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, watching her with sympathetic eyes. "I brought you some tea," the older woman said, holding out a cup. "Thank you." Rosalie accepted it gratefully. "I needed a moment of air." Mrs. Winters nodded, glancing back to ensure they were alone. "May I speak frankly, miss?" "Please do. You remind me of myself, many years ago." She sat beside Rosalie on the porch swing. "I came west full of fire and dreams, married a man I barely knew because it seemed the practical choice." "Were you happy?" "For a time. He was a good man in his way." Mrs. Winters sighed. "But I always wondered what might have been if I'd waited for love." "Love is a luxury many women can't afford," Rosalie said, repeating what her mother had always told her. "Perhaps. But passion, that fire in your spirit, that's not something to surrender lightly." Mrs. Winters patted Rosalie's hand. "Mr. Peterson is an honorable employer, very fair, very proper." "But," Rosalie prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation, "but he has never understood that some things cannot and should not be controlled." The older woman stood. "Just something to consider before tomorrow." After Mrs. Winters left, Rosalie remained on the porch thinking. The storm was closer now, lightning illuminating the distant mountains. Thunder rolled across the plains like a warning. In Boston, she'd fled a marriage that would have extinguished her independence. Had she traveled all this way only to face the same fate? When the rain began to fall, she remained, letting the wild weather wash over her. By the time Peterson called her inside, her decision was made. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright after the storm. The church in Whispering Pines was filled with curious townsfolk eager to see Peterson's mail-order bride. Rosalie stood in a small anteroom, dressed in the white gown Peterson had commissioned. It was beautiful, but constrictive, the high collar feeling like hands around her throat. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting Mrs. Winters, Rosalie called, "Come in." Instead, Holden Tucker entered, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. His usual worn leather hat was replaced by a clean black one, and his blue eyes stood out against his dark suit. "Holden!" Rosalie gasped. "You shouldn't be here. It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride." "I'm not the groom," he reminded her, closing the door behind him, "and I needed to speak with you before the ceremony. This is highly improper. I've never been much for propriety." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "You don't have to go through with this." Rosalie's heart pounded. "What? I've seen you these past 3 days, watching you try to fold yourself smaller to fit Peterson's expectations. It's not right." "It's not your concern," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" He took another step toward her. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you stepped into that general store. The way you held yourself, spoke your mind. You're too fierce for this, Rosalie." "Fierce?" she whispered. "Yes. You've got fire in you, a wildness that needs space to burn." He reached out, almost touching her cheek before dropping his hand. "Peterson will douse that flame until there's nothing left but ashes." Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. "Then what am I to do? Return to Boston in disgrace? I have nowhere else to go." Holden took a deep breath. "Come to my ranch." "As what? Your housekeeper? Your mistress?" She shook her head. "I didn't come west to become a fallen woman. As my wife, Rosalie." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "I know it's sudden. I know we barely know each other. But I know enough. I know I want to build something with you, not break you down." Rosalie stared at him in shock. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." He smiled slightly. "I didn't come here planning this. But seeing you in that dress, knowing you're about to promise yourself to a man who'll never appreciate your spirit, I couldn't stay silent." "This is madness," she whispered, but her heart was racing with something other than fear. Maybe it's the only thing that makes sense. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "You're fire, Rosalie. It's the warmth I've been looking for all my life. Don't let someone extinguish it." Before she could respond, another knock came at the door. "Miss Fairchild, it's time," Mrs. Winters called. Holden stepped back, his eyes never leaving Rosalie's. "It's your choice, always your choice." Then he was gone, slipping out the side door as Mrs. Winters entered. "Are you ready, dear?" the housekeeper asked, then paused, noticing Rosalie's expression. "Is everything all right?" Rosalie looked down at her tightly laced dress, then at the door through which Holden had disappeared. Fire or conformity, passion or propriety, freedom or security. "Mrs. Winters," she said slowly, "I need to speak with Mr. Peterson, privately, before the ceremony." 5 minutes later, Peterson stood before her in the anteroom, his expression concerned. "Miss Fairchild, this is most irregular. The guests are waiting." "Mr. Peterson," Rosalie began, her voice steadier than she expected, "I cannot marry you." His face registered shock, then anger. "Cannot or will not. Both. I am not the woman you believe me to be. I am not gentle or meek. I will never be content with a life defined by order and control. This is preposterous. We have an agreement." "An agreement based on deception," Rosalie admitted. "The letters you received, they were not all written by me. My cousin was your original correspondent. When she fell ill, I took her place." Peterson's face hardened. "So, you've been lying from the start?" "Yes, and I cannot begin a marriage with such dishonesty." She removed the engagement ring he'd given her the previous day. "I'm sorry for the embarrassment this will cause you. You realize you'll be ruined," he said coldly. "No decent man will have you after this scandal." Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "Then, I'll make my own way." Peterson shook his head in disgust. "I knew something was wrong the moment I saw you, too headstrong by half. I should have sent you back immediately." "Yes," Rosalie agreed. "You should have." She gathered her few belongings while Peterson went to dismiss the guests. Through the window, she could see people exiting the church, expressions of shock and curiosity on their faces. Scandal would follow her, she knew. But for the first time in days, she could breathe freely. Mrs. Winters found her changing out of the wedding dress. "So you've decided," the older woman said, helping her with the buttons. "Yes, I cannot marry him." "And Tucker?" Rosalie's cheeks flushed. "How did you know?" "I have eyes, child." Mrs. Winters smiled. "I saw the way he looked at you, the way you looked at him. He asked me to marry him instead." "And will you?" "I don't know." Rosalie pulled on her traveling dress. "It seems equally impulsive. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot yet comprehend." Mrs. Winters patted her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, be true to yourself. That's all that matters in the end." Once dressed, Rosalie faced the challenge of leaving the church without confronting the curious crowd. Mrs. Winters led her to a side door that opened onto an alley. "Your trunk is still at Peterson's," the housekeeper said. "I'll make sure it's sent wherever you direct." "Thank you for your kindness." Rosalie hugged the woman. "I'm not sure where I'll go yet." "I think you are," Mrs. Winters replied with a knowing smile. "Good luck, Miss Fairchild." Rosalie stepped into the alley, uncertain of her next move. The town's only hotel would surely be unwelcoming to a woman who just jilted one of the area's prominent citizens. As she hesitated, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the alley. Holden leaned against his wagon, hat tipped low over his eyes. When he saw her, he straightened, hope and uncertainty warring on his face. Rosalie walked toward him slowly. "How did you know I'd come out this way?" "I didn't, just hoped." He studied her changed attire. "So you told him?" "Yes." "Any regrets?" "None about ending the engagement," she said honestly. "Some about causing public embarrassment. This town thrives on scandal. They'll be talking about something else by next Sunday." He hesitated. "What will you do now?" "I'm not entirely sure." She met his gaze directly. "You made me an offer?" "I did. Still stands." "We barely know each other, Holden." "True enough." He stepped closer. "But I know you've got more courage in your little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. I know you see beauty in wildness. I know you speak your mind and stand your ground. Those aren't necessarily wifely virtues," she pointed out. "They are to me." His voice deepened. "I don't want a woman who'll fade into the background. I want a partner, someone to build with, argue with, love with." "Love?" The word hung between them, fragile and powerful. "Yes, love." He took her hands in his. "I can't promise I'm already there. That would be another lie. But I know I could love you, Rosalie Fairchild, easily and completely." She looked down at their joined hands. "This is madness." "Probably," he agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. "But sometimes madness is exactly what's needed. If I say yes, I want time. Time to know you properly before we marry." "Of course." He nodded seriously. "You can stay at the Widow Wilson's boarding house in town. She's a good woman. Won't judge you for breaking things off with Peterson. I'll court you properly, or as properly as I know how. And if it doesn't work between us, then I'll make sure you have what you need to go wherever you want to go. No obligations." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "But I'm hoping it will work." Rosalie took a deep breath. Everything in her upbringing warned against such impulsiveness. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, urged her forward. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I accept your courtship, Holden Tucker." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. Without warning, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing. When he set her down, his hands lingered at her waist. "May I kiss you, Rosalie Fairchild, just to seal our understanding?" Instead of answering, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but electric, a promise of passion to come. When they parted, Holden looked slightly dazed. "Well," he said, his voice rough, "that's one way to answer a question. Rosalie laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I believe in clear communication, Mr. Tucker. I look forward to many more such communications. He helped her into the wagon. Now, let's get you settled at Widow Wilson's before the church crowd disperses. As they drove away from the church, Rosalie didn't look back. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt she was moving towards something, not just running away. Widow Wilson's boarding house proved to be a haven. The cheerful, plump woman welcomed Rosalie without a hint of judgment, showing her to a cozy room overlooking the town's main street. Mr. Tucker explained your situation, the widow said, helping Rosalie unpack the few belongings she'd carried from the church. Peterson had sent her trunk as promised, though with a coldly formal note expressing his disappointment in her character. I imagine the whole town is talking, Rosalie sighed. Of course they are, Widow Wilson agreed cheerfully. Nothing like a scandal to liven things up, but don't you worry. They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough. True to his word, Holden began courting Rosalie properly. He called at the boarding house each evening after his ranch work was done, sometimes taking her for walks through town, other times simply sitting on the porch swing, talking until darkness fell. They exchanged stories of their pasts. Rosalie learned that Holden had fought for the Union in the war, returning home to Pennsylvania to find his parents dead from influenza and the family farm sold for taxes. With nothing to keep him there, he'd headed west, working cattle drives until he saved enough to buy his own small parcel of land. In turn, she told him about her privileged but stifling Boston upbringing, her father's shipping business, and her refusal to marry the banker's son, who was more interested in her family's connections than in Rosalie herself. I was raised to be decorative and agreeable, she explained one evening, as they watched the sunset from the boarding house porch. My opinions were considered unnecessary at best, inappropriate at worst. Seems a waste, Holden replied, his shoulder warm against hers on the swing. Your mind's one of your finest features. Only one? She teased. His eyes crinkled. Well, those green eyes are fairly distracting. And your laugh. And the way you get this little crease right here. He touched gently between her eyebrows. When you're thinking hard about something. Heat bloomed in Rosalie's cheeks. You're becoming quite the flatterer, Mr. Tucker. Not flattery if it's true. He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. I'm just stating facts, Miss Fairchild. These moments of tenderness were interspersed with practical demonstrations of ranch life. Holden taught Rosalie to ride properly. Not that side saddle nonsense, he insisted. He showed her how to mend fences, tend vegetable gardens, and even helped her practice with a small revolver. A woman alone needs to protect herself, he said seriously as they set up targets behind the boarding house. I won't be alone, Rosalie reminded him. I'll have you. God willing, but I can't be everywhere at once. And this country can be dangerous. He positioned her hands correctly on the pistol, just in case. As weeks passed, Rosalie found herself falling deeply in love with both Holden and the wild country he called home. His ranch, though smaller than Peterson's, hummed with life and purpose. Where Peterson imposed order, Holden worked with the natural rhythms of the land. The townsfolk gradually warmed to Rosalie as well. Her initial notoriety as the woman who jilted Edgar Peterson gave way to respect as they saw her willingness to work hard and adapt to Western ways. She helped at the general store when the owner's wife fell ill, taught reading to several ranch children too far from the schoolhouse, and even assisted the local midwife with a difficult birth. By summer's end, Rosalie had become a fixture in Whispering Pines. The scandal of the canceled wedding was all but forgotten, replaced by genuine acceptance. One golden September afternoon, Holden arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual. He wore his best shirt and had trimmed his beard. Let's ride out to the creek, he suggested. It's a perfect day. They rode side by side, Rosalie now comfortable in the saddle of the gentle mare Holden had given her. The land was beginning to show the first hints of autumn, the grasses turning golden in the sunlight. At the creek, the same spot where they'd first truly spoken months before, Holden spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree. From his saddlebag, he produced a small picnic, fresh bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of wine. This is lovely, Rosalie said, settling on the blanket. What's the occasion? Holden looked uncharacteristically nervous. Do I need an occasion to spend time with the most beautiful woman in the territory? She laughed. Now I know something's afoot. You're never this flowery with your compliments. He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. You know me too well already. They ate and talked, watching the creek flow past, pointing out birds and discussing plans for the coming winter. When they'd finished the food, Holden grew quiet. What is it? Rosalie asked, touching his arm. You seem miles away. Just thinking about the first time I saw you, he said, covering her hand with his. Standing in the general store, looking like you'd take on the whole world if necessary. I was terrified, she admitted, trying not to show it. You succeeded. He turned to face her fully. Rosalie, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Mine too, she said softly. I know we agreed to take time, to court properly. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. But I'm hoping you might consider that we've done enough courting. Rosalie's heart quickened as he opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm. It was a simple gold band set with a small but perfect emerald. It was my mother's, he explained, the only thing I kept when I left Pennsylvania. I've been carrying it, waiting for the right woman. He took her hand. I love you, Rosalie Fairchild. Your strength, your spirit, your heart. Will you marry me? Tears filled Rosalie's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Holden Tucker. I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked. I don't want to wait much longer. Nor do I. She smiled against his lips. Before the first snow. That gives us a month or so to prepare. Too long, he grumbled, but his eyes were bright with happiness. 3 weeks. I'll have the new room addition finished by then. 3 weeks it is. She kissed him again, joy bubbling through her veins like champagne. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the prairie, they packed up their picnic and rode back toward town, Rosalie's new ring catching the golden light. You know, Holden said as they neared Whispering Pines, Peterson was right about one thing. What's that? You're definitely too fierce for his kind of love. He grinned at her. But your fire is exactly the warmth I've been needing all my life. Rosalie's heart swelled. From mail order, bride to frontier, wife-to-be, her journey had taken unexpected turns. But now, riding beside the man she loved toward a future of her own choosing, she knew she'd finally found her true home. The weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Rosalie moved her belongings to the Triple T Ranch, though she continued to sleep at Widow Wilson's until after the ceremony, a concession to propriety that amused both her and Holden. As if the whole town doesn't already know we're mad for each other, Holden remarked one evening as he reluctantly bid her goodnight at the boarding house door. It's not for them, Rosalie explained, stealing one last kiss. It's for us. To make our wedding night special. The ranch house underwent a transformation under Rosalie's guidance. The bachelor quarters Holden had been content with for years gained curtains, rugs, and the feminine touches that made a house a home. Together they built additional shelves for Rosalie's books, her most treasured possessions, and Holden surprised her by constructing a small desk where she could write. Your letters were what first drew me to you, he explained when she admired his handiwork. Even if they weren't all truly from you, your words have power. I don't want you to lose that part of yourself. News of their engagement spread quickly through the community. Most received it warmly, though Peterson remained coldly distant whenever they encountered him in town. His disapproval bothered Rosalie less than she might have expected. He'll come around eventually, Widow Wilson predicted. Or he won't. Either way, it's his loss. 3 days before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the boarding house. Rosalie was packing the last of her belongings when Widow Wilson knocked at her door. There's a gentleman to see you, the landlady said, her expression curious. Says he's come a long way. Rosalie descended to the parlor, where a tall, distinguished man in an expensive traveling suit stood examining the modest furnishings. When he turned, Rosalie gasped. Father! Franklin Fairchild looked older than when she'd last seen him 6 months earlier. His auburn hair, the same shade as Rosalie's, was now streaked with more gray, and new lines creased his face. Rosalie, he said, his voice betraying more emotion than his stern expression. "You're a difficult woman to find." "How did you locate me?" she asked, too shocked for pleasantries. "I hired Pinkerton detectives." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a rare sign of nervousness from the usually composed businessman. "May we speak privately?" Widow Wilson discreetly withdrew, leaving father and daughter alone in the parlor. "You look well," Franklin said after an awkward silence. "Healthy. Different somehow." "I am different." Rosalie gestured for him to sit. "Why are you here, father? Your telegram made your position quite clear." He sighed heavily, lowering himself into an armchair. "Your mother is ill, Rosalie. Her heart. The doctors say—" He paused, clearing his throat. "She asks for you constantly." Concern flashed through Rosalie. Despite their differences, she loved her mother deeply. "How serious is her condition?" "Serious enough that I've come to bring you home." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "The ultimatum was a mistake, pride and anger speaking. I see that now." Rosalie sat across from him, studying the face so like her own. "I'm sorry about Mother, truly, but I can't return to Boston permanently." "Because of this cowboy I'm told you're marrying?" His tone suggested exactly what he thought of such a match. "His name is Holden Tucker," Rosalie said firmly. "And yes, partly because of him, but also because I've found myself here, my place, my purpose." Franklin frowned. "What purpose could you possibly have in this?" He gestured vaguely. "Wilderness? Living authentically? Building something meaningful with my own hands?" She leaned forward. "I'm respected here, Father, not for our family name or fortune, but for who I am." "And who are you exactly?" There was genuine curiosity beneath his skepticism. "Someone stronger than I knew." She smiled slightly. "Someone with fire, as Holden says." Her father studied her for a long moment. "You do seem centered, more confident." He sighed again. "Your mother will be devastated." "I'll come visit," Rosalie offered. "After the wedding, for as long as necessary, but I can't stay in Boston." "You're truly determined to marry this man?" "I love him, Father." Something in her tone must have convinced him of her sincerity. His shoulders slumped slightly. "At least allow me the courtesy of meeting the man who's stolen my daughter's heart before I return east." "Of course." Relief flooded through Rosalie. "He'll be here this evening. Will you stay for dinner?" "I suppose I must." He straightened his waistcoat. "And perhaps you might show me this ranch he's so proud of tomorrow." "I'd like that very much." That evening's dinner was initially tense. Franklin Fairchild, accustomed to Boston's finest establishments, looked out of place in Widow Wilson's humble dining room. Holden arrived directly from working cattle, though he'd obviously made an effort to clean up. "Mr. Fairchild," Holden said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet Rosalie's father." Franklin shook hands, his expression guarded. "Mr. Tucker? I understand you intend to marry my daughter in 3 days' time." "Yes, sir. With your blessing, I hope, though we'll proceed regardless." Franklin's eyebrows rose at this directness. "At least you're honest about your intentions?" "Always try to be, sir." As the meal progressed, the conversation gradually eased. Franklin questioned Holden about his ranch, his background, his plans for the future. Holden answered straightforwardly, neither apologizing for his modest circumstances nor pretending to be anything other than what he was, a hard-working rancher with ambitions to expand his operation. By dessert, Rosalie noticed her father nodding thoughtfully at several of Holden's observations about cattle markets and land values. "You have a good head for business, Mr. Tucker," Franklin conceded. "Thank you, sir. Had to learn quick out here. Mistakes can cost you everything." "Indeed." Franklin turned to Rosalie. "Your young man has convinced me he's not just some uneducated cowhand. Whether he's worthy of you remains to be seen." "Father," Rosalie began, but Holden placed a calming hand over hers. "Mr. Fairchild," he said evenly, "I know I can't offer Rosalie the luxuries she grew up with, but I can promise to love her, respect her, and build a good life together. I'd say that makes me plenty worthy." A long silence followed. Then, to Rosalie's astonishment, her father smiled, a small, reluctant quirk of his lips, but a smile nonetheless. Well spoken, Mr. Z's. Tucker? He raised his coffee cup in a small salute. Perhaps there's hope for this match after all. The next day, Holden showed Franklin around the Triple T Ranch. To Rosalie's relief, her father seemed genuinely interested in the operation, asking questions about water rights, breeding programs, and seasonal challenges. You've accomplished a great deal in 8 years, Franklin acknowledged as they completed the tour. Most men would have needed twice that time. Had good mentors, Holden replied, and not much else to focus on, until Rosalie came along. Franklin watched his daughter as she moved confidently around the ranch, greeting the hands by name, checking a newborn calf with knowledgeable hands. She seems at home here. She is home, Holden said simply. She belongs to this land now, as much as it belongs to her. That evening, in the privacy of Rosalie's room at the boarding house, Franklin made his peace. I came to bring you back, he admitted, to restore the family as it was. And now? Rosalie asked. Now I see that's impossible. You've become your own woman, Rosalie. He looked older, sadder, but also resigned. Your mother will be heartbroken, but she'll understand eventually. She always said you had too much of my spirit to be contained. Will you stay for the wedding? Franklin nodded. I'll stay, and I'll give you my blessing, for whatever that's worth to you now. It's worth a great deal, Rosalie said softly, embracing her father for the first time in years. More than you know. On October 15, 1876, Rosalie Fairchild married Holden Tucker in Whispering Pines Small Church. Unlike her almost wedding to Peterson, this ceremony was filled with genuine joy. Rosalie wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Widow Wilson had helped her make, adorned with lace from her mother's wedding gown that Franklin had brought west. Holden, standing tall in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle on her father's arm with an expression of such pure adoration that several of the town's more romantic ladies dabbed at their eyes. Never seen a man look at a woman quite like that, the blacksmith's wife whispered to her neighbor, like she's water in the desert. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Pastor Goodwin pronounced them husband and wife, Holden pulled Rosalie into an embrace that left no doubt about his feelings. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at the Triple T Ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and lanterns hung from trees. Everyone from Whispering Pines and surrounding ranches attended, everyone except Edgar Peterson, whose absence was noted but not mourned. As the fiddle music played and guests danced beneath the stars, Franklin Fairchild approached the newlyweds. I've been considering your operation, Holden, he said, uncharacteristically using his new son-in-law's first name. It has potential. Thank you, sir. Enough potential that I'd like to propose an investment. Franklin withdrew an envelope from his jacket. A wedding gift, of sorts, capital to expand your herd, improve your water access, perhaps hire another hand or two. Holden stared at the envelope, then at Franklin. That's very generous, but it's not charity, Franklin interrupted firmly. It's business. I expect returns, and regular reports on my investment. Rosalie understood what her father was really offering, a reason to maintain connection, a bridge between their worlds. It's a sound investment, Holden, she said softly. The Triple T has excellent prospects. After a moment's consideration, Holden nodded and accepted the envelope. I appreciate your confidence, Mr. Fairchild. We won't disappoint you. See that you don't? Franklin's stern expression softened as he looked at Rosalie. Take care of each other. This country forgives few mistakes. We will, Father. Rosalie kissed his cheek. And we'll visit Boston in the spring, as promised. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Holden pulled Rosalie away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot near the creek that had become their special place. Happy Mrs. Tucker, he asked, drawing her into his arms. Completely, Mr. Tucker. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Though I still can't quite believe my father came all this way. Shows how much he loves you. Holden's fingers traced patterns on her back. Can't say I blame him for wanting you home. If you ever left, I'd search the world over to find you. You'll never need to. She lifted her face to his. This is my home now. You are my home. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the night to come. When they returned to the celebration, several guests exchanged knowing smiles at their flushed cheeks and bright eyes. As the last wagon departed, Rosalie stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching the dust settle in the moonlight. Holden came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Come inside, wife," he murmured against her ear. "The rest of our lives is waiting." That night, in the room they would now share, Rosalie discovered the full meaning of passion of giving herself completely to the man she loved and receiving his devotion in return. Their coming together was tender at times, fierce at others, a perfect reflection of the love that had grown between them. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Holden traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You know," he said softly, "when I first saw you, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on, but too fierce for someone like me." Rosalie smiled in the darkness. "And now? Now I know your fire is exactly what I needed." He kissed her forehead. "The warmth that makes this house a home, the light that guides me home when I'm in the fields, the spark that I hope will burn between us until our last breath." "It will," she promised, curling closer to him. "Some fires can't be extinguished." 1 year later, Rosalie stood on the porch of the expanded Triple T Ranch house. Watching as Holden rode in from the northern pasture, her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child who would arrive before Christmas. The ranch had flourished with Franklin Fairchild's investment. New breeding stock had improved their herd. Additional hands had been hired, and Holden had purchased adjacent land when it became available. The modest ranch was now one of the most promising operations in the territory. Rosalie herself had found unexpected fulfillment. Beyond running the household and keeping the ranch books, she'd begun writing articles for newspapers back east about life in the West. Her practical, unsentimental accounts of frontier women's experiences had found an eager audience, and she now had a regular column in a Boston weekly. When Holden reached the yard, he dismounted with his usual grace and strode toward her, his face lighting with joy, as it did every time he returned home. "How are my girls today?" he asked, placing his hand beside hers on her belly. "Active?" Rosalie laughed. "Your daughter seems to have inherited your restless nature, or her mother's fierce spirit." He kissed her thoroughly, then knelt to press his lips against her rounded stomach. "Settle down in there, little one. You've got a few more weeks before you can run wild like your pa." The baby kicked in response, making them both laugh. "Any news from town?" Rosalie asked as they entered the house together. "Letter from your father." Holden handed her an envelope. "And word that Peterson's getting married again." "Really? To whom?" "Widow from Denver. Very proper lady from what I hear. Perfect match for him." Rosalie nodded, genuinely pleased. "Good. Everyone deserves happiness." As they settled at the kitchen table for coffee, Rosalie thought about how different her life might have been if she'd gone through with that first wedding. If she'd tried to suppress her true nature to fit Peterson's idea of a proper wife, if she hadn't found the courage to choose her own path. Holden seemed to follow her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts, love. I was just thinking how fortunate I am," she said, reaching for his hand, "to have found a man who doesn't want to tame my fire, but to warm himself by it." His fingers intertwined with hers, the matching gold bands on their hands catching the afternoon light. "Most fortunate man in the territory, that's me." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "Got myself a fierce, beautiful wife who keeps me on my toes and warms my heart." Outside, the Wyoming wind whistled across the plains, carrying the promise of winter. But inside the home they had built together, Rosalie and Holden Tucker had all the warmth they needed, the enduring fire of a love that had recognized from the very beginning that what others saw as too fierce was exactly what they both had been searching for all along.